Welcome back to the Insulin Insights podcast. I'm looking forward to this episode today. As you can tell by the title, I'm going to be delving into long-acting insulin. So, for non-diabetics out there, just to give you some context, we take a fast-acting insulin, which is for our meals, or if we're making a correction on an existing high blood sugar, we take a fast-acting insulin, which, as the name reveals, brings it down fast. And then we take a long-acting insulin, which doesn't have the same onset profile. It's designed to keep you stable between meals. So if I wasn't to take my long-acting insulin, I'd be going high between meals overnight. It would be a bit of a disaster. Thankfully, I haven't missed a long-acting insulin dose in years now, but there would be numerous occasions where, like in the past, where I was a lot more slack with my diabetes, that I would forget about it and be second guessing myself. Have I done it? Because it's so instrumental. Like if you don't do that long acting dose, the consequences, you could be messed up for potentially like 48 hours. I mean, it's a big deal. Thankfully with Tresiba, which I'm going to be talking about today, which is the long acting insulin I'm on now and have been for a couple of months, is a bit more forgiving. Whereas Lantus, it's more imperative that you do take it at the same time every day, or sort of certainly within like an hour or two window. Whereas Tresiba, you can get away with taking it a little bit later on than you did the previous day, because it's actually more known as an ultra long acting. So think of Lantus as a long acting insulin. Tresiba is like an ultra long acting. It actually lasts up to 42 hours. So the doses sort of overlap each other, which is why it's a bit more forgiving in terms of timing. Anyway, I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But before I do, I just want to point out that this is my lived experience. What works for me probably won't work for you exactly. Like, don't copy my ratios or exact methodology. I'm just here to give you some pointers in the right direction, and obviously refer to diabetes nurses. This is not medical advice, it's just my lived experience, and I believe through telling you what I've experienced, that might give you some ideas or can benefit your own diabetes management. But of course, find what works for you, and this might, if you were like me, this might give you some encouragement that maybe Tresiba is the way forward. Like from my experience, I'm going to be talking about how it's really benefited my diabetes management. So if you're highly athletic and live a really active lifestyle, you might also find that Tresiba works better for you. But it's just personal preference and it's what works for you. There's so much individual variability with this condition, which is why you have to be really careful when you're educating. And obviously, as a type 1 diabetic coach, you have to be really mindful of that. So it's important to put that disclaimer out there. But yeah, I just want to give you a slight intro as to why I'm making this episode. So I don't compete at a competitive level, but I would consider myself an athlete with type 1 diabetes. I'm running 40 to 60 kilometers a week. Strength training 3 or 4 times a week, and at my NEAT, which stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis, is very high as well. So that's like your movements, which you wouldn't consider exercise, but so things like steps, doing the dishes. I'm always up and about, to be honest. I don't really like sitting down for too long. So yeah, I'm burning a lot of calories that way as well. So I'm an active type 1 diabetic is my point. And for a long time now, overnight lows have been an issue for me, especially on high activity days. It was almost an inevitability. Like no matter how little insulin I do, I might spike up, but I'd gradually, see it fall down. And that was really infuriating. Like that made me feel powerless in a way, because it's like, how do I prevent this? And that's what eventually caused me to switch to Tresiba. I've tried everything I can on this Lantus, and it just won't give me stable blood sugar overnight. So that was a decision I made through my own research. So yeah, I switched to Tresiba probably about 2-3 months ago, and I just want to give you my lived experience with it. And if you're someone similar, very active type 1 diabetic, having a similar issue, then you might find this beneficial. Just why I'm putting it out there. Obviously, this won't apply to pump users, which is a lot of type 1 diabetics. I'm still on pens, and I intend to keep it that way for the foreseeable. Because obviously, as a pump user, you don't take a long-acting insulin. It just gives you tiny increments of fast-acting insulin to bring it down throughout the day. But yeah, any pen users out there having similar issues on Lantus, this could be very informative for you. And I just want to give some education about the two types of long-acting insulins anyway. So yeah, I'm not here to tell anyone what insulin to use, just explain why this change has so far worked well for me, especially as someone who trains hard. So that is the framing behind it. So yeah, I've given you a little bit of information on what basal insulin is. So basal insulin is the same as long-acting insulin, and obviously the word basal, it's background insulin, so it doesn't work the same way as fast-acting. It's there in the background to keep you stable in between meals and overnight. And if your basal insulin dose is correct, it should have glucose steady without food. So if you're constantly going low overnight or dipping between meals, so fast-acting insulin has a profile of roughly 3 hours. This is Nova Rapid insulin, Fiasp slightly less. So if you're often seeing a dip sort of after the 2 hour mark, you can't go beyond 3 hours without having to eat some form of carbohydrate. That would be a big indicator that your basal is too high. And the flip side of that, if you were going high between meals and overnight, especially when you wake up in the early hours of the morning, that would be a sign that it's too low. So hopefully that gives you some context. And overnight is ultimately the stress test of basal insulin, because you're going to be, if you're sleeping 7 to 9 hours, which is the ideal amount, hopefully you're getting somewhere near to that, because sleep is extremely important as a type 1. So yeah, obviously you're not going to be eating during that time, so that's going to be usually the longest time you go without food in a day. So your sugar levels overnight, when there's no activity going on, obviously you're lying down, there's no cortisol or anything which could push it up or down, that is the biggest indicator. So use that as your kind of reference point. So I just want to move on to Lantus specifically and how it works, and go through some of the pros and cons. And obviously I've had to do some research for this. I kind of know a lot of it off the top of my head, but I wanted to make sure it's structured well so you guys can take as much from it as possible. So I'm kind of referring to notes, so sorry if it doesn't always feel as fluid. But how Lantus behaves. So you take this once daily, and unlike Tresiba, it's not generally recommended, and my nurses didn't recommend it themselves, but some will, and there is more leeway, I guess, when it comes to splitting Lantus. So some people will split Lantus, and that's something which I considered. I never actually tried it because it was just a little bit daunting, and I just didn't like the thought of having another injection to deal with. It's just easier to take it in one go, but some people find this beneficial because Lantus actually, I think I mentioned earlier, Tresiba has a life of about 42 hours, so it's an ultra long-acting. Lantus, you could call it just a long-acting because it actually only lasts 24 hours, and in a lot of cases it's actually closer to 21, 22. It might not even last you the full 24 hours. So that's why some people might split it, because they see themselves tailing up towards the end of the dose. So that's where splitting could be helpful if you're seeing that. But in my instance, it was actually the opposite. I was going low towards the end of the dose and like overnight. But I won't go too deep into that. But how it differs from a fast acting is it forms micro precipitates under the skin, and this releases insulin gradually, unlike fast acting, which obviously releases it straight into the bloodstream, so you can eat and it will match the absorption of the carbs. So, like I mentioned, it's not perfectly flat. It can have sort of peaks and troughs, and that is the main issue I was having with it, is that I would inject it, and although it's meant to be a flat, long-acting insulin, a few hours after injecting it, it would have a little peak, and that's where I'd be seeing a lot of overnight hypos. So that was just my personal reaction to it, and that might differ for other people. Some people might even be going high. It really is a matter of just assessing your own data, and that's, like I mentioned earlier, it's a complex condition, type 1 diabetes. You'd think medication should act similarly for everyone, but it's not always the case. So the pros are, like, it's widely used and familiar. Actually, my experience switching to Tresiba wasn't that straightforward. I had to push it quite a lot because Lantus is cheaper for like the NHS to get hold of. So they probably weren't too keen on me going onto Tresiba. They were really trying to convince me to stick with Lantus, and I was trying to tell them I've done everything and it just will not work. So eventually did convince them. But yeah, from a price standpoint, that's probably why a lot of people get put on it straight away, is it's just the most familiar insulin, long-acting insulin. So it's predictable for many people. They know how it's going to work, and it often works well for non-athletes with stable routines. But obviously, I'm not that. I'm a highly active individual, so that's where I think I was having the issue with it. Which brings me on to the cons, which is the mild peak several hours after injection, which was especially apparent in my case. And that peak often overlaps with deep sleep, so that's where the nocturnal hypoglycemia was coming into play. And exercise done earlier in the day actually increases its effectiveness and that peak. So especially if I did like a big run in the evening, that's what I mean, it was like inevitable. I knew a hypo was coming almost no matter what I did. So that was really tough, and I was just like, felt powerless, because it's like I'm trying everything here and I just cannot make it work on Lantus. So on paper it's long acting, but in practice there's still a shape to it, and that's where Tresiba there's less of a shape. So that rolls on nicely to giving you some insight on Tresiba. And like I mentioned, it's more of an ultra long acting insulin, and this forms long multi-hexamer chains under the skin. So the insulin slowly releases, like the Lantus, but at an even slower rate over 42 hours. So that's where your doses actually overlap, and that's where creates a flatter profile, basically. So it's flatter, slower, and it's more forgiving. Like I mentioned, don't necessarily have to take it at the same time every day. Like I still take it at 9 p.m. every night, but it wouldn't be a big deal. Like last week I went to the cinema and the film didn't finish till like 10:30, and I got back closer to 11, but I wasn't concerned about taking it then. I knew it wouldn't make a big difference. Whereas on Lantus, I'm like getting antsy if it's like past 9 o'clock and I haven't taken it, because I know there's more of an emphasis on doing it at the same time every day. Obviously, it still helps doing Tresiba at the same time every day if you can, but it's not as much of a stress if you don't. So why this matters overnight is there's no real peak and there's less stacking effect, which means there's lower risk of nocturnal lows, which is the exact problem I was trying to solve. So putting an athlete lens on it, why Tresiba suits training better is because training increases insulin sensitivity. And this is where, and the reason insulin sensitivity increases, which I think I've delved into on my episode about running and managing blood sugar, is it increases your sensitivity because the glycogen stores need to replenish, and that process involves taking glucose out of the bloodstream. And in a non-diabetic, you'll get an appropriate glucagon response to keep it elevated, but we don't have that same glucagon response. Type 1 diabetics do produce some glucagon, but it doesn't work in the same way as a non-diabetic, and that's where low blood sugar can occur. You've also got increased GLUT4 activity, which I won't go into now, but it's GLUT4 activity. And you've got a parasympathetic dominance during sleep. Obviously, you're not stressed at all. There's no cortisol, which could be elevating your blood sugar, because we know stress, adrenaline, that increases your blood sugar. But obviously, when you're resting at night, your heart rate is going to be the lowest it will ever be during the day. At least it should be, because there's no external things going on to elevate it. So you're in a really relaxed state, and that's going to also increase your sensitivity. And there's also less hormones going on, which I just kind of delved into, like cortisol, adrenaline. Whereas with Lantus, obviously the sensitivity increases, and then you've got the peak from Lantus. So that just kind of creates a recipe for potential low blood sugar, and that's what I was constantly dealing with. Whereas with Tresiba, the sensitivity goes up, but where it's a flatter basal, you're going to get more stability. So Lantus, sensitivity up. With the insulin peak, you're probably going to get a low. And Tresiba, the sensitivity is obviously up, but you've got flat basal and stable, which is kind of what I just said. I was trying to put a clearer picture on it, but I don't think that really worked. Yeah, hopefully you got the gist of that. So the insulin didn't change, but my physiology did. So Tresiba just stopped punishing me for that, is the way I looked at it. It stopped punishing me for my active lifestyle and helped support it. So it's been phenomenal what it's done for me, and this is what I think is really key. Like, obviously I'm extremely grateful for the NHS and doctors, but you do have to be your own doctor in a lot of cases. Like for me, this wasn't suggested to me that I switched to Tresiba, even though I've been coming to meetings about my blood sugar for years on end, discussing how I've been struggling with hypos overnight, and never once was it suggested that Tresiba could solve that issue. And given how much of a change it's made, I can't believe that it wasn't, honestly. Like, if they knew that it was that could have the potential to be that impactful, I'd have thought it would be suggested to me rather than me having to really push it myself. But through my own research I did, and yeah, I'm really grateful that I did that, and it's been pretty game changing, honestly. Because at one point, especially in like the week before I made the switch, it was just really bad, and that's what ultimately gave me the incentive to really push and try a new long-acting insulin, because it was just the amount of hypos I was having overnight, it was not good. So and I noticed these changes like straight away as well. So like I said, I've probably been on it for about a few months, and genuinely, like, I can count on both my hands how many hypos I've had to treat. I honestly wouldn't say it's been more than like 5. It's been incredible. I can't emphasize that enough. So obviously that means fewer overnight alarms, especially at the beginning. It did result in more highs, and I was having to split bolus for my dinners a lot more, because I eat quite mixed meals, like high fat, high protein, high carb for dinner. So obviously where I didn't have that same peak Lantus was giving me, I was having to inject more, and I was getting woken up with high alarms a bit more. But I've kind of learned to adjust to that now, and it's working really well. But that was something I had to deal with at the beginning, so you'd need to be prepared for that if you were to switch. And less fear of going to bed slightly lower, which is just a nice feeling. Like, I knew if I was going to bed below 6, that a hypo would probably ensue, and that's just not a nice feeling, going to bed. Whereas now I can go to bed below 5 and be quite confident that I'm still not going to go low. If anything, probably creep up, and that's where I do often need to split bolus. So obviously fewer corrective snacks. From a calorific standpoint, I wasn't really bothered about that, because I think with the amount of activity I do, like, it's not a problem for me consuming extra calories, but it's just not healthy to be waking up in the middle of the night and eating. That's something which really annoyed me and that I was conscious of. I hope that didn't just cut out. I don't know what happened there. Hopefully that was all good. And obviously better sleep quality as well if I'm not having to get up and eat, go to the kitchen. Sometimes takes me a little while to fall back to sleep. And funnily enough, actually, I did have a low last night. It was only 3.7. So also the manner of the lows. If I do wake up with a low now, it's usually like a minor low. But I was just waking up at like 2.6 and crazy hypos like that. I have not had that since I switched to Tresiba, which is, testament to how good it's been for me. But yeah, obviously if you're getting disturbed less with lows, that's good. I was just saying I did have a low last night actually. I did have to get up and eat something and it took me a while to get back to sleep, but thankfully those occasions are fewer now. And it just gives you more confidence training consistently. I don't feel like I'm going to be punished for it overnight. Like a couple of weeks ago I did a 33k step day and I didn't even have a hypo overnight, and that just would never have been possible on Lantus. So it gives me more confidence that I can train hard and not face those consequences. So just to give a balanced take, I don't want to use the word glaze Tresiba too much. Like obviously there's cons to it. Like I mentioned, it can result in more highs as well, where it's more of a boring flat insulin. But yeah, slower to adjust dose changes. So I actually did have to make a -2 reduction on my Tresiba because I was having not lows during the night, but I was waking up low and between meals, and it probably took about 4 days for me to see that really reflect on my blood sugar, because it's a 42-hour long-acting insulin compared to Lantus 24. The corrections take longer to show up, so there's that to consider. And the missed dose consequences are different where it is longer acting. It's also less flexible for people who like rapid basal tweaking. So if you're someone who likes to deviate between, like I know some people who will they've got quite a broad range. They're like, I'll inject 20 to 28 units of basal depending on patterns. And in that case, it's probably not as suited to you, but I'm more of just sticking with a fixed dose. So that's also something to consider. And yeah, it's not magic at all. It's just better aligned with how my body behaves, which is a good way of summing it up. So don't think because I've had an amazing experience with it, you will too. It really depends on your own experience and your body and your activity levels, like I said. But if you are someone like me who's highly active and you were also on Lantus struggling with hypos, I think this could probably be quite game changing for you. So yeah, that's all I wanted to do, is just give you my experience and raise some awareness. So just finally to close, who might benefit most, without telling you what to do, just giving you an idea. Endurance athletes, people with frequent nocturnal hypos, highly active lifestyles, and those with variable training loads, which is me down to a T. And people who might not are, like I said, people needing rapid basal adjustments because it's a lot slower to show up. And yeah, I invite you to reflect on patterns, not perfection. You know, you don't want to aim for perfection. You just want to analyze the data and react in a calm and composed way. Speak to your diabetes team, like I said. Don't jump the bandwagon and think, oh, he's had a great experience, I'm going to go straight onto it. It's always worth discussing with obviously experienced healthcare professionals, and yeah, advocate for what fits their life is what I've written down here. So yeah, I'll let you make that decision, but that brings it to a close. Hopefully that was constructed well enough. Probably a bit longer than I expected it to be, so hopefully I didn't waffle on too much, and hopefully you gained something from this. And if you did make it to the end, I really do appreciate that, honestly. If you're listening now, super grateful, and look forward to producing more podcast episodes. And if you are interested in type 1 diabetes coaching, I don't want this podcast to be about preaching my business, but if you do like what I'm saying and you think I've got the knowledge, you're impressed with my knowledge, then yeah, please do reach out and I can help give you more one-to-one tailored advice. So yeah, take care and look forward to the next one.